Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. This might come as a surprise, but I don't spend my evenings most of the time. Now, there are certain exceptions. I don't spend my evenings watching a lot of true crime because I deal with it day in and day out. And I think that you can probably understand if you're a nurse and you work in an ER or a med surg floor or surgery, there's a high probability you don't go home and watch medical procedural shows. I'm just spitballing here. Okay. The same thing. If you were a firefighter, you're probably not going to go back. And I'm thinking right now, the show Rescue Me, you're probably not going to go home and sit down and with an ice cold beverage and watch Rescue Me. But there are certain exceptions. And I've had people, a lot of our friends out there that have been asking me to take a look at this program that is now on Netflix, Maternal Instinct. And I got to tell you, it intrigued me in the sense that I have covered cases similar to this over the past few years. But this one was quite striking. It was quite striking in the degree of duplicity, the degree of brutality, and I think the sad ending to two lives. And a lot on that program was made of the perpetrator. Unfortunately, it seems as though the victims were kind of decoration in the hallway of the home of horror. And it was all about the suspect, Taylor Parker. Today on Body Bags, this episode is not going to be about Taylor Parker, okay? It's going to be about Reagan Simmons Hancock and Braxton Sage Hancock. And we're going to talk about what happened to them by no fault of their own. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Brother Dave, I always sing Dave's praises because he deserves it. He creates incredible show notes for the dummy that I am, and Dave is the maestro. He's the conductor of the symphony here, and he does this fantastic job, and he brought out the salient point. And it's something I think that we need to meditate on, because it's not just this particular program on Netflix that is focused on the perpetrator. It's multiple shows out there that always focus on the perpetrator, and the victims, it seems many times, turn into props. And I hate that. I really do. And I'll say it from now until this show ceases to be. We're about the dead here, and we're about the memory of them, and essentially what kind of life they lived and what kind of life they missed out on. I think that that's important. And also the horror that led up to their deaths. And Dave, I thank you for bringing that to my attention relative to this documentary.
The documentary is called Maternal Instinct, and it's on Netflix, and it is a well-done documentary. And yet, after I did watch it, because I wanted to see where they were headed with it, because I'm going to be honest with you, Joe, and you know this, that the crime, we end up talking about the criminal. We end up talking about Kohberger or Bundy or, Heuermann. We talk about them because they are the reason we are doing it, but the victims are always left out in terms of who they were. And it's because they're not the bad guy. They were oftentimes in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, with Reagan Simmons Hancock, this is a 21-year-old woman who was pregnant with her second child. She was one of these people that just everybody loved. She was that person that, I'll give you an example, Joe. Reagan Simmons Hancock was pregnant, 35 weeks pregnant. But even though she was uncomfortable, even though she has a 3-year-old daughter who's a handful, and even though she and her husband are getting ready for their newborn on the way, when Taylor Parker called her on
Hmm.
October the 7th to meet for a cup of coffee at Starbucks, Reagan said, okay. Reagan went on October the 7th and met. And actually, she got a little present to give to Taylor because Taylor was having a tough time. That's the kind of person Reagan was, putting her own needs aside and helping her friend, somebody she thought was a friend. Now, just to give you an idea, that was 2 days before Taylor Parker destroyed Reagan Simmons Hancock and her unborn baby in her home, in Reagan's home. But I want to point that out because it was a lot of people are like, well, how did this happen? Okay, how did Taylor Parker get involved? Because when we started covering this, Joe, it started with a woman on the side of the road gets pulled over by the highway patrol, claims she has just given birth to a baby. They get her and the baby to the hospital right away, and the baby dies. Now, that was the first blurb the story made, and I remember seeing it, and I'm making notes. And within an hour or two, we already knew something was wrong. Because now we have this woman who claims to have given birth on the side of the road, but now we have a murder of a pregnant woman. And it all started, it came apart that fast. But we have been covering, or I've been covering this story since it happened on October 9th, 2020, believe it or not. And when I saw the show on Netflix, it just made me mad. It made me mad because, Joe, there are plenty of people that knew who Taylor Parker really was. A lot of people knew. And you know what they knew about her, Joe? Taylor Parker, at 27 years old, telling everybody she was pregnant. It was impossible for her to get pregnant, Joe. She'd had a hysterectomy. And a lot of people knew she had a hysterectomy, including her mother.
Yep.
And a number of people reached out online, on social media. An ex-husband even reached out to her current fiance and said, man, I don't think she's playing it straight with you, fella. There were a lot of people. But you know what? As those people came out after Taylor Parker, do you know who defended her? Reagan Simmons Hancock. Reagan defended Taylor Parker against all the attacks on social media, claiming that Taylor Parker was a lying scumbag and that she was scamming everyone. Reagan Simmons Hancock protected her friend, and it cost her her life. That's why we need to talk about her.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that we do. Stepping back just for a second, considering this beast, one of the questions that I think that many of us like to ask, and there's never an answer to the question, but you sit there and you wonder. I do, at least, when I watch programming like this and I hear these stories. I've stood over bodies in the morgue, knowing who the perpetrator was.
Oh yeah.
And thinking, who
Yeah.
raised these people? From where did they spring from? What is it that gave this individual the architectural framework within their mind and in their spirit that they could be so callous and so horrible that they would do something like this? And when I'm reading over the injuries in this case, you know what movie came to mind for me? Braveheart. That closing scene, one of the closing scenes where William Wallace, of course, it's all fictionalized essentially, but he was drawn and quartered, and he's still alive, Dave, while this is happening. It's probably one of the more horrific scenes that's a non-horror movie that is in film, and it is so incredibly cringeworthy, the level of brutality in that movie. It's interesting, that that Gibson directed two movies that for me, that movie is horrific. You know, when he is getting drawn and quarter, the battle scenes or whatever.
Yeah.
And it makes my skin crawl. And the other one is The Passion. It's like I cannot watch The Passion again. It's like it's too much. I can't do it. But I would submit to you that what we see with William Wallace, that awareness that he's portrayed with, and they wanted to keep people aware of that.
Right. Well, you know, Joe, when I went through as I was reading the autopsy reports and things like that, and I thought, I have a lot of questions for Joseph Scott Morgan. And the one thing that we do have to understand is how it got this far, okay? Because Reagan Simmons Hancock was a wonderful person. She didn't do anything to bring this evil, okay? Do you know how they met?
No.
The reason Reagan Simmons Hancock met Taylor Parker was she needed needed a photographer for her wedding when she married Homer Hancock. And so she had contacted a couple of friends who had gotten married, and Taylor Parker had done a couple of other weddings and some other, photography. And they met, Reagan and Taylor met and talked about photography. And when Taylor got involved in shooting the film or the pictures for Reagan's wedding, that she and Taylor just clicked. Reagan and Taylor clicked on a personal level to the point where Taylor was brought in almost as an extra bridesmaid. I think it was Reagan's sister-in-law, was talking about how involved Taylor was in everything, and she was the paid photographer, but Reagan just included her in everything. She sensed that Taylor needed that. And so that's how they met. And that relationship, it grew from there. See, Taylor Parker was spinning a web. She has two children by two different men. Her first child was born when she was 17, little girl, and the other was a little boy. She was married to her husband, and she gave birth to her son Trey. So she's got two little kids, and she doesn't want to have any more. After she had her son Trey, Taylor Parker decided, I don't want to have any more kids. And like a lot of women do in their early and mid-20s, she had a tubal. Now, a tubal can be reversed. Not easy, but it can be done. And a lot of women will go that route when they go, okay, I don't want any more kids, but what if? And so that's what she did. The problem is that the year after, within a year of having that tubal, Joe, she had was an ectopic pregnancy. Is that what that's called? Okay. And that ectopic pregnancy was to the point where she had to undergo a full-on hysterectomy. Taylor Parker did, which means the removal of the uterus.
Yeah, and I think that they took one ovary as well, leaving another one there. It's going to lessen kind of some of the hormonal issues that come about. But yeah, you're absolutely right. She did, in fact, have a hysterectomy.
And when you do that, you're not having children. It's not going to happen. And so there were a number of people, Joe, that knew this because living in a small town, you're talking about Reagan living in New Boston, Texas, and Taylor living in areas around there. Everybody knows everybody, It's just, and so there were people at the medical clinic where Taylor Parker had this done. They all knew. And so Taylor Parker's her relationship, okay, the marriage, it ends up in divorce in 2019. And Taylor Parker meets her fiance, Wade Griffin. Wade Griffin is I'm reading this, okay? A local hog trapper. Now, do you know what a local hog trapper is? It's a man's man. I will tell you that. You got to be a no-nonsense man's man to be a hog trapper.
Yeah. They use the big metal traps to wrangle these wild hogs. And of course, Texas has got a major, like many places do down in the South, got a major problem with wild hogs running about and destroying the land and all those sorts of things. And yeah, he truly was. Yep. And, I saw the interview with him, and he's just this old country boy. Now I'm not making excuses for him, but he's working as a hog trapper, all right? And then he runs into this kind
Taylor
of
Parker.
grandiose person in this perpetrator, who's, I think that she had intimated, am I correct, in that she had intimated that she's going to be worth millions and millions of dollars, right?
Joe, she didn't just intimate that she was going to be worth millions. She laid claims and scams and schemes. Now, here's how quickly it happened. Taylor Parker meets Wade Griffin in the summer of 2019. In a matter of a couple of weeks, she's living with him. By January 2020, she's saying she's pregnant. So in 6 months' time, they go from not knowing one another to living together, and now Taylor says she's pregnant.
I think, I got to tell you, and again, one of the things I'm thinking about is, how could you not know that she had a hysterectomy? Now, there are multiple ways to have this procedure performed, but I'm just saying, how has that, and you're intimate with this person, you're making plans with this person, and I don't know if has just recently rolled off the turnip truck or what the case might be, but I find that bit very, very intriguing here. That when you first meet somebody, you don't. Well, some people are the exception, but most people don't get into the really intimate areas of their life when first meeting, right?
Oh, buddy.
Some people find it impossible to keep their mouth shut, and they'll tell you everything about them. However, when you get into this kind of relationship where you are, kind of promising yourself to one another, how is this missed? Because, the conversation is going to arise about having kids, Dave.
I can tell you how it was missed, Joe. Because, see, Wade Griffin, he wasn't sold on Taylor Parker. But Taylor, you mentioned grandiose, okay? Taylor Parker laid out this game plan that she was a wealthy heiress, and she and her mother were on bad terms. And her mother was messing with her money that she was going to have millions of dollars, but her mother was preventing her from having it. Now, Taylor Parker, and I'm going to make this very quick, but Taylor Parker used up to 30 fraudulent phone numbers and identities and emails online to craft an entire network of people, places, and things, Joe, so that when Taylor Parker found out that what Wade Griffin really wanted was kind of a ranch. There was a ranch area in Oklahoma that he really wanted, and it was worth about $4 million, a little more than that. And you know what? When Taylor found out that's what he wanted, Taylor made it happen. Taylor Parker was able to create fraudulent documents to get realtors involved, bankers involved. They're on the phone. She's making a deal. Paperwork is passing through hands. A $4.1 million deal on this ranch. And Wade Griffin is a flippin' hog guy. He's a hog trapper. And you know what? At a Christmas party, Joe, Taylor Parker is making this whole presentation to all of Griffin's family, talking about how they're going to have this ranch and how nice it's going to be. And she's just happy that she can provide Wade with all of his dreams. And he bought it hook, line, and sinker. But I don't think Wade Griffin was ever in love with Taylor Parker. I think she overwhelmed him with BS, and he didn't know how to get out. And I think he was hoping to get out when the deal fell apart on the ranch. Because, well, she made up a story about her mama cutting her off. But, there were enough shady things going on. Wade Griffin was not an idiot. But also, Taylor Parker, when things started getting weak, Joe, that's when she got pregnant, said she's pregnant. And she pretty much cut Wade Griffin off from sexual contact after that. They were not intimate. Yeah. So from January, they meet June, July, move in together. She moves in. And by January, they're now pregnant, planning a family, and she basically cuts him off, okay? This girl had it dialed in, all the scheming and scamming that went into it. So I don't blame Griffin as much as I do. He, I think, was just overwhelmed by a sociopath. I think that's really what happened. The girl went so far as to hold a daggone gender reveal party, Joe, and brought her other 2 children there so that they could take part in this whole
Yeah.
thing. And it goes beyond anything one can imagine. She dug so deep. And all I could think of is the people who knew she couldn't get pregnant. The people who knew she couldn't get pregnant were trying to speak up, but they kept getting cut off. And you know who was cutting them off?
And
Reagan Hancock. Reagan was defending her friend.
And, you know, you sit around, and if you ever have that one friend and you know that they're off plumb a little bit, as they say, you'll just let them prattle on because that's just the way they are. But the problem is that you can have someone who has, in fact, had a hysterectomy, perhaps a vaginal hysterectomy that's not going to show any evidence of it. You can have somebody that claims that they have millions and millions of dollars just waiting for them. You can have somebody that says that they are pregnant. But what you don't ever see coming is the butchery that soon follows. And that is it precisely what happened. Brother Dave, I can tell you that the curtain is closing on Taylor Parker at this point relative to my podcast. We're not going to really talk about her that much more. So if you're listening out there, I hope you're not too disappointed, but that's the reality of it, because who we are going to talk about is Reagan. And we're going to talk about this precious little angel, Braxton. Because, Dave, as I said earlier, the level of horror that we're talking about here in this particular case is beyond the pale. We hear that a lot. You know, we hear people say things like that. And Dave, when you read through the commentary and you read through the report of the medical examiner, you can tell the level of brutality, because there's 2 things that dovetail with this. It's what the pathologist says that did the autopsy, and I'm talking about Dr. Melinda Flores, who she works at Southwestern, which is the big forensic center that's in Dallas. It's a fine organization. At trial, you've got her testifying to these injuries, all over Reagan's body, and then you have the crime scene technician that was at the scene, and she's actually relating the level of brutality at the scene and movement. And why is that important? Well, it's important because Reagan sustained so many injuries to her body, and she still had life within her. She's leaving blood behind throughout this house. And my interpretation of this is that some of these wounds, obviously, there is a plethora of these wounds, and they're all in different categories. Okay.
Can I ask you something, Joe?
Yeah, sure.
All right, because one of the things that happened in this is we were talking earlier about how Taylor Parker had scammed everything to get to this point, and I already mentioned how she was with Reagan on October the 7th and October the 8th, the night before this happened. Well, the thing y'all have to know is that Taylor Parker had a due date. It was in late September. And as you know, she didn't have a baby in there, so she was trying to figure out what to do. Now, you know what her mother said, Joe? When they asked her mom, why didn't you at least come forward? She goes, well, I thought at some point she was going to say, oh, I lost the baby. Okay? That's what some people who knew she couldn't carry a child, that's what they thought. She was just going to have to bail on this at some point, and that's what she would do. When that didn't happen, due date passed. She's 10 days after her due date, and that's why Taylor Parker went just BSC. I mean, that's the only thing I can understand about the violence and what took place inside Reagan Simmons Hancock's home, because Joe, it was all over. It was game over for Taylor Parker. Every scheme, everything she had lied about ended, and it was time. Nobody believed her. At this point, Wade wasn't buying her stories either.
I don't see how in the world she thought that she could pull it off. And And going back to when you talk about that moment in the car where this trooper had pulled her over, and she's got the umbilical cord that's literally, coming out of her pants there. And, interestingly enough, there was a paramedic that rolled out on the scene on this case. And they made a very interesting comment. When you cut an umbilical cord, generally there's going to be some blood. Okay. You have to clamp it in two spots, and, it's cut off. When they cut that umbilical cord, there was no real seepage. And as a matter of fact, he makes an interesting comment. He said that it appeared that there was clotted blood and that there was separation of blood. And so when we have one of the ways you can tell that we don't talk a lot about in my field is when you have blood that is deposited somewhere, you can begin to see the components of blood separate. Like you'll see this kind of straw-colored liquid on one side. That's serum that's over there. And the red blood cells are migrating away from it, because in order to stay constituted, because blood it consists of multiple components, it has to circulate. Okay, so once that circulation stops, there's this coming apart, if you will. And so the paramedic actually made comment that he could see serum there and he could see clotted blood. And that's consistent with this baby had not just been born.
Okay. That explains so much. I wondered how because back at the house, Joe, when Taylor Parker gets there that morning on the 9th, and the attack that begins and was so frenzied and all over the place, that's why I was like, not understood, that's the wrong term, but Taylor Parker there were no other options left. She had to get a baby. And she saw Regan Simmons Hancock as the only way she was going to get a baby. And I think she kept pushing it to get to that 35-week mark, which is where Regan was at that point. But Joe, how is it possible that Regan Simmons Hancock, at 35 weeks pregnant, she was beaten, stabbed, sliced all over that house? There was blood everywhere. By the way, her 3-year-old daughter was in the home while this was taking place. She was hiding in her bedroom.
God bless her.
I guess, what did Regan endure? Because she was alive through all of this and standing up for most of it.
Yeah, and here's the other thing that she endured. She endured, well, we can't say endured. We can only proffer a guess, I guess. Maybe she was in a perimortem state. The other thing that was endured, at least by her remains, was this half-ass C-section that was performed. So rudimentary. And when she was opened there after the level of brutality, the uterus actually popped out of the incision, and the uterus was also incised. When this beast removed this angel, by the way, the little angel wasn't dead at that point in time. It was some time before the child was pronounced. That I still can't factor that into my thinking, but she took placenta, she took the umbilical cord, and of course this little treasure. And interestingly enough, EMTs had actually, there's a monitor that they put on babies like this when they are in a deficit. The EMTs actually saw that the baby was ashen in appearance, was washed out, white, that sort of thing. But there was still hope for life. They actually pushed a round of epinephrine, which is essentially adrenaline. Okay. And they saw a peak on the EKG, and so there was some rhythm there. At some point in time, of course, the baby Braxton was later uh, later pronounced dead. But if you really want to send a chill down your spine relative to what Reagan had gone through, and this is why I think that she had an awareness of the C-section. They found blood and placenta under her fingernails. So even in the throes of death, she's trying to defend her child. And that's why people think about nail scrapings and trimmings, and we talk about that stuff a lot. But, one of the things that you're going to come up with when you do these trimmings is you're going to see cells that are contained in there, looking for skin cells. I've even seen it where you've got adipose in there. You can't have muscle if it's open and somebody's digging in there. I don't think in all my years I've ever heard of a cellular material that's associated with a placenta found beneath the fingernails. And that gives you an idea of the level of brutality. But I think that it's important for us to understand, backing up, the degree to which she was brutalized. And it's really hard to try to understand the dynamic of someone that's going to set off on this trajectory. I'm remembering back right now. We actually, I remember covering a case. I may have been on Law and Crime, covering a case of a woman that had done something similar up in Arkansas. Amber Waterman was her name, and she is serving 2 life terms right now. Okay, we're not talking about a death row case, but it's the same type of thing. And I sit for some time, and I remember thinking about it in that case. How do you prepare yourself for this if you're a perpetrator? How do you know what you're going to do? And what tools do you show up with at a scene in order to facilitate this kind of horror? How much planning goes into it? Because with this perpetrator, there's always been, you use the term sociopathic, and Reagan is the target of all of this. How do you plan this out? And how are you going to subdue her to the point where you can facilitate this crime, Dave?
And she would need to be alive. I mean, in order for the baby to be removed and to be viable, I would think, wouldn't the killer have done everything possible to subdue the victim, to get Reagan subdued, but to keep her alive to cut the baby out?
Yeah. And that goes back to the Amber Waterman case that I was just mentioning. And in the perpetrator's eyes, that wants a child like this, an in utero child, in the perpetrator's eyes, the mother is merely just a conveyance or a vessel for this. Okay, they know, even if they're really low IQ, they know that they have to keep the mother alive as best they can, or the child is not going to be viable.
Yeah.
For whatever purpose they want the child. I think there was another one up way north I don't know if it was North Dakota or wherever. I think they were going to sell that baby or something that happened like that. That happened in a motel room, if I'm not mistaken. I know our friends will remember out there. But
we've had a few of these, Joe. It's not like, it's sad. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, we really have, and they're horrific. I mean,
yeah.
They're absolutely horrific. But with Waterman, going back to her, she kidnapped that victim in that case and transported her pregnant, okay, to a location before she perpetrated the same type of thing that Reagan was subjected to. And let me tell you this, when I lay on you what Reagan went through, you're not going to believe it, because I got to tell you, in all of my years and my experience, I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that she lived. But then again, I'm not a mama, and mothers just have a way of wanting to protect their babies. Where do we start? Well, when we consider what the medical examiner discovered relative to Reagan, we begin to see this horror kind of play out before us, and it is in fact the stuff of nightmares. Dave, she's got a total now. Bear with me here. She's got a total of 113 sharp force injuries, and when we say sharp force, as our friends know that have been following body bags for a long time, there's multiple categories of sharp force. So to start off, she's got 15 stab wounds. Now, you say, well, Morgan, she's got 15 stab wounds. You said there were 113 sharp force injuries. Let me finish. She's got 98 incised wounds. 98. Just think about that number. How many of you guys out there have ever cut yourself with a knife? Okay, maybe I'm not talking about stabbing. I'm talking about you're slicing an apple, you're slicing a tomato. Okay, maybe you've picked up a piece of paper. One of the worst pains in the world is a paper cut, right? I know you might be laughing about that, but it hurts, right? So things that you're cutting, you're carving a roast, it doesn't matter. Or, maybe you're sawing on something and you cut yourself. Think about how painful that single incised wound is. And this will give you an indication as to what Reagan suffered here. We're talking about 98 slices. Okay. Now, some of these are going to be variable in depth. They are categorized as cuts, which for me, when you say cuts, it's something that's more purposed, where there's more pressure involved in a cut. So if you're pressing down with directed pressure onto an area and you're drawing the knife kind of slowly, think about slicing a tomato, okay? That's a cut. The other incised injuries that she has are categorized as slashes. Now think about what that implies. When I think slash, I think about, some 19th century cavalry officer, right on the back of his horse with a saber, and he's slashing or hacking at somebody with a saber. You see somebody with a machete and they're clearing land. That's a slash, okay? They're slashing at a lot of power. So, and they're generally slashes many times tend to be longer as well. So you're dragging this blade across the surface of the skin. And as you're doing it, you're kind of whipping it. Okay. You're whipping it across the surface. Slashes tend to be longer than cuts. Okay. So I would imagine that with the slashes, when the forensic pathologist was taking a look at these, sometimes you'll see, if you'll just imagine or take on a piece of paper and just draw kind of what we refer to as a curvilinear mark, which means that it has characteristics of a curve, but it also has linear. So it'll go kind of in an ellipse like this, but it tails off into a line. It kind of whips around. That's what they're talking about, a slash. And you'll see this. And dependent upon the energy that is exercised on that area, it will many times go down through not just the skin, but the subcu fat and even into the muscle. And it doesn't necessarily require a lot of pressure, but you have to have a lot of leverage in order to do that. So the doctor, as she is assessing these injuries, she's noting their placement all over her body. And there's some defensive wounds as well, which would, that's going to count to the total of the stabs slashes slash cuts as well. She has had 2 perforating stab wounds actually to her neck. I think one of the reasons that she lasted, that Reagan, we're going to say her name, that Reagan lasted as long as she did, is that these injuries insulted the jugular vein as opposed to the carotid. Okay, so the stab wounds that press into the neck, the jugular vein is essentially adjacent to the carotid. And with this type of insult, as opposed to when you cut into an artery, you've got that kind of pulsing hemorrhage that's going on. The vein just kind of leaks, if you will, and it's just like you still die, but it's a slower event than say. But then you cut down to these other injuries, and they are literally these injuries that she had all over her body. Many of them extended all the way down to the bone. That's something that we refer to in forensics as a full thickness injury. So you're going all the way down through the multiple strata of the skin and the subcu fat and the muscle, all the way down to the bone. And, you're having the body laid open. I'll never forget. I've got in my collection of images, I've got a guy that was tortured with a straight razor, and his chest is completely opened up from left to right. That when you have these cuts, these injuries, because this is not being done by a surgeon, and when surgeons do incisions in order to open the body, they follow the map of the contour of the body. These are called lines of Langer. So when a physician, for instance, with an old McBurney incision, all of our friends out there that have, before laparoscopic surgery, if you ever had your appendix removed, you'll notice that you have this diagonal scar in your right lower quadrant of your abdomen. Well, that follows this line, the surgical line, because if you go against the grain, and yes, we do have grain in our skin, it gives you this really kind of nasty open injury. The same way if you're doing, surgery, say on the head, you've got the lines of Langer that run like this, and they can sew this back together. But when you have these slashes, these random slashes, and you get these nasties that are like this, they run contrary, to the lines that are there, they're open and gaping. So this is what the forensic pathologist would have been looking at. This is what the crime scene investigators would have been looking at when they arrived at the scene, Dave. And, we're talking about sharp force injuries here. But, Dave, in addition to this, she's also got multiple blunt force trauma.
39, Joe.
Yeah.
39 blunt force trauma. Dude, did you see? No, when I was looking over this, Joe, I thought, how long did this go on? Just the number of injuries, Joe, okay? It had to have gone on a real battle, a real fight, but 39 blunt force injuries. And when it came back, they said they felt like the injuries were caused by a hammer. A hammer, Joe. Have you ever had to do one like this where you had that number of wounds from a hammer?
Yeah, and one of the problems, I think, just thinking back to the incised wounds that she would have sustained, is that you will have what are referred to as mixed or overlapping injuries as well. And so these sharp force injuries have a particular appearance to them, right? I mean, I've talked about that, for a while, not necessarily on this episode, but we've talked about that for a while. There's certain things that we look for in cuts. Okay. Clean margins, for instance, we're talking about with a milled edge. So when you look at the margins, you're not going to have what we've talked about in the past, tissue bridging, where the edges, the margins will be very, very clean, even if it's against the lines of Langer. Okay. So, but you'll have these clean margins. It's just like, I know this is grotesque, but it's just like the next time you have a piece of chicken, if you take a blade and you cut your piece of chicken, okay, on one end, say a boneless chicken breast, you'll see how clean that margin is. Go to the other end of the breast and grab your two sides of it and pull. And when you pull, you'll see these little stringy connective tissues. That's called tissue bridging. And to the blunt force trauma, when you're struck with a hammer, okay, you're going to get a laceration, and a laceration is not a cut. That's as a result of blunt force trauma. So you'll have this tissue bridging where at one point in time, the tissue was all united like this, but because of the strike, it rips open the skin. It's literally a ripping of the skin, and you still have these connected bits of tissue. That's why when we go out on scenes, and they would have done this with Reagan as well, because they're trying to make sense. Can you imagine what a bloody mess this was? Because we're talking about blood deposition all over the house and certainly all over her. When you're looking at this, you're trying to ascertain in your own way at the scene, is this a blunt object, or is this actually a knife that has generated this? So you can't really make that determination until you get back to the facility so that she can be cleaned up. But I'd probably have to concur that the hammer is the obvious tool here with this assault. And here's why. Underlying these strikes, Dave, she had 5 skull fractures. So if we were to think about somebody using a hand to punch somebody in the head, in order to, I don't even know if, I guess Mike Tyson could, if he had the body kind of held down on the ground and it's kind of shored on the ground and he's punching down, he probably could fracture a skull. Okay. But for a normal non-superhuman person, you're going to have to use an object, or like maybe your foot if you're stomping. And I've had that happen. But when you've got 5 individual fractures, Dave, each one of those fractures represents a separate strike. That's what the doctor is telling us here. So for every fracture line that exists, and many times you'll get with a hammer attack, you'll get what are called depressed skull fractures or circular skull fractures. So, for instance, got a nickel right here. Okay, now that's a little bit smaller than the business end of a hammer. Okay, so the diameter is going to be a bit more narrow. But when you're struck in the head with a hammer, that is, if you're struck with the business end, the actual blunted part of it, you'll get a plug. It's like a plug fracture like this that actually marries up to what the business end of the hammer looks like. So that could be one fracture. You might, and they're saying that these are 5 individual fractures that she had in her skull. Morgan, why are you going through all this? Why are you telling us all this? I'll tell you why I'm telling you all this. Because it's evidence of the level of horror that Reagan was subjected to. I don't give 2 hoots in hell about the fact that she's on death row right now. I really don't, because I know, just based upon the fact of what she went through, that is Reagan. I don't care that this perpetrator is on death row, because what Reagan was subjected to and what that precious little angel was subjected to I'll put it to you this way. If you went to a professional conference and you presented this case, okay, you draw a crowd. There would be people that had been working in medical examiners' offices. There would be at least a few in the crowd that would sit there and go, they would draw a breath. That's how extensive these injuries are.
Okay, but Joe, we've got all these injuries. We've got, the 5 skull fractures. We've got a broken nose, and yet it appears that Reagan was also strangled.
Yeah, that's the other piece to this.
Is that because the Parker was trying to keep her alive? Is that what it was? She was trying to, I'm trying to figure out.
I think she's trying to subdue her.
Okay.
I think she's trying to subdue her. That may have happened early on. It's hard to know, or maybe
right.
It's quite possible. Remember, we've got her moving about the house, because the crime scene technician actually goes into great detail talking about the deposition of blood and the dynamicism of the blood deposition throughout the house. Okay. Maybe the sequencing went with the horrific tact, because this seems very, very frenzied. You don't have a lot of energy at the end of something like this. So in her final throes, if she is down on the ground, maybe she's trying to choke her out. But if she's still alive, and maybe she's, leaking life out of her body, she has an awareness when that one final time the blade is put to her lower abdomen, and this C-section, and I use that term very loosely here, is performed on this poor woman as she's laying there. She's going to have an awareness. She's got debris beneath her fingernails, Dave, that gives you an indication that there had to be some kind of reactive presence still there. And it's hard to know relative to this. Was this an attack that, the sequencing of it could get muddled many times? And lots of times, in the morgue, when we're looking over bodies and even to the scene as well, police that are there, they're tell us exactly what happened. I can't tell you exactly what happened. All I can tell you is what has happened. If you're looking for timing, sequencing, all those sorts of things, sometimes those things are just, they're, the sweet Lord above only knows. You don't know this. And when it's all said and done, when Dr. Flores got up on the stand and, she's talking about, what was the cause of death? Well, she drops this fancy word, well, the cause of death is actually exsanguination. Well, what the heck does that mean? Well, exsanguination actually means blood loss, that you literally bleed to death. Now, many people can bleed to death in many ways. I've had people that have, bled to death as a result of chronic ethanolism, and they blow out a varice in their esophagus because it erodes, and they blow out this varice and they start vomiting blood. Well, you can bleed out that way. That's exsanguination. You can have a single gunshot wound. You can die of exsanguination. But Dave, Reagan sustained horrible, horrible injuries. And I can only imagine that what the doctor was observing, because she didn't just observe this rudimentary opening of the abdomen. Dr. Flores actually saw the uterus as well, because the uterus had been, incised as well. So this perpetrator knew enough that, that this is, you have to open several layers here with pregnancy. If you're talking about a C-section, this is what doctors train to do. Midwives that help participate in these procedures, and there's a very specific route you have to go down in order to deliver this child. I would be really fascinated to know to what extent had the perpetrator prepared themselves in order to follow through with this. But we know that there was a large incised area on the lower abdomen. I can't imagine in any context, if you're a civilian and you're coming into this, can you imagine being picked for this jury, Dave?
The whole story, Joe, is awful. And then what happened to Reagan, who by all counts is that friend everybody dreams they'll have, and this is how she gets treated. The baby, okay, Joe, Braxton Sage Hancock was born alive, was stolen, ripped from the womb alive, right?
Yes.
All right. So how did that happen? How did she get the baby out? And I'm trying to figure out, I can't imagine the monster it takes to do that, I guess. I just can't quite get over that hump.
Yeah, she literally, after she opened the uterus, okay, this is after opening the abdomen and then concurrently opening the uterus, she would have literally have dipped her hands into Reagan's abdomen. And with the placenta the baby still within the placenta. Now, I think it takes a rather deft surgical hand in order to, in an ideal surgical environment, you have to be, you have to have really good training. That's why doctors OBGYNs go through this extensive training, okay, in order to understand depth.
Right.
Okay. That's a big thing when you're talking about surgery. But with her, what did it take to rupture the placenta? We know that she took the placenta and essentially detached the umbilical cord from within Reagan's body and walks out the damn door with the whole package, Dave. And this baby this baby is alive. There's a chance of viability. This baby, Dave, she was, I think, gestational age was like 38 weeks. Reagan was, 35. Listen, nowadays we've gotten gestational viability up to, some people say it can go as low as 21. The general rule of thumb is about 24.
Yeah.
But we're talking about a baby that's that close. This baby could easily survived, outside of the womb with little or no problem whatsoever. And unless there was some kind of genetic predisposition or some kind of thing that you're not fully aware of, this baby is completely viable here, Dave. And that goes to the predatory nature of this perpetrator, because they're watching Reagan.
Yep.
Hey, she kind of matches me in this lie I've been spreading about. And you're talking about, when the wheels are falling off, how's she going to explain this? Even the mother says, well, she'll say that she miscarried at some point in time. Really? What'd you do with the baby? If you're at, she said she was at 38 weeks or had passed delivery. I mean, so that's up in the 40s. So you're talking about her having passed her due date at that point in time.
There was no explaining that. Yeah, there was no explaining, how did you go past your due date? What's up? And so that's why I think she set her sights on Reagan early enough on,
Yeah, it triggered this reaction. She, at this point, perpetrator's got 1 foot in a boat and 1 foot in the water. What you gonna do, man? And and I tell you what she did. She went in there and acted like a savage. She acted like an animal, the way she treated Reagan and this baby. Okay, because this is a viable baby, Dave. This baby was, and here's the thing, because, and I'm sure that one of the thoughts that defense probably had was this baby even viable, or was the baby already deceased in utero? So they have to be able to demonstrate, that this child was viable, that the child was not a stillborn. All right. And all you have to do is, just kind of see what the EMT said, see what the people at the hospital said, and said, yeah, this baby had life. It had life, Dave. But just like with Reagan, the baby's life was stolen. This baby's life was stolen. Reagan's life was stolen. And the life that could have been lived for many, many more years to come, full of joy, up there in that small Texas town, everybody associated was robbed. But guess who hasn't been robbed? The perpetrator. Because the perpetrator is still with us, still drawing breath, reflecting on the lies that she has planted all around. But you know what this old death investigator thinks? I bet there's not a shred of guilt in her black, hollow soul. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bag.